You're listening to Living Out Loud with my mom, Michele Flamer. Yep, she's a flamer and proud of it. Get ready to learn about queers in your communities doing great things every week.
Hey, welcome back to Living Out Loud. And if this is your first time here, welcome. I'm really glad that you've joined us today. I'm your host, Michele, and we are going to shift gears for a solo cast this week. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about queer culture, like not just what we see online, but how we're actually living right now, how we connect, how we date, how we find each other, and sometimes how we don't. Because something is shifting, you can kind of feel it. And I want to talk about that. But before we get into where we're going, I want to take a second and remember where we started. Because none of this, the parades, the flags, the visibility, none of it happened because someone handed it to us. It happened because a group of people at a bar on Christopher Street got tired of being raided, tired of hiding, and one night in June of 1969, year I was born, they fought back. That's it. That's the whole origin story. Not a celebration, a refusal. A year later, people marched to remember it. And that march is the reason Pride happens in June. I bring that up because we sometimes forget. Now we're in July. There are still a lot of Pride events going on. And here in Phoenix, our Pride actually doesn't even really begin until like October when the weather changes. But honestly, we see the parades and the merch, and it can start to feel like queer culture is just aesthetic vibes. But underneath all of it is that same instinct. People are deciding they're done shrinking themselves to be tolerated. That's the thread I want to pull on today. So let's start with something that used to feel central to queer life: the apps. Grindr, Her. I think I was on a app back in my 20s. I know I'm dating myself, called Planet Out. And that was a really cool app. And Match. But Grindr, Her, Tinder, Bumble, OkCupid, all of that. For a long time, those apps were lifelines, especially if you lived somewhere where queer spaces didn't actually exist or didn't feel safe. You could open your phone and suddenly there were people like you. But now, a lot of people are tired. Not just dating app tired, but like emotionally drained by what those spaces have become. The endless swiping, the same conversations that go nowhere, the way profiles can reduce people down to categories: body type, race, masculinity, femininity. And then there's the stuff that hits deeper: racism, transphobia, exclusion. That mask for mask energy that tells you very clearly who is and isn't being valued. Some people are stepping back. Some are deleting the apps completely, like I did. Others are just using them less or differently. But overall, there's this quiet shift happening away from those platforms. And in that space, something else is starting to grow. People are looking for connection that feels real, not instant, not transactional, not biased, or based on proximity alone. I've seen more people turn towards smaller, more intentional spaces lately: group chats, local meetups, mutual aid networks, niche platforms where the goal isn't just to match, it's to actually know each other. And that shift feels really important because it's not just about dating, it's about community. And honestly, I think a lot of us are realizing we've been missing that. There was a time when queer spaces were physical: bars, bookstores, community centers. I know there still are out there. They're just such a smaller realm of them. There's just not as many in each state. These places where you didn't just pass through, you stayed. You built relationships. You saw the same people over time. And many of those spaces have disappeared, changed, or become less accessible. So now we're kind of rebuilding, but differently. It's not just about recreating what existed before, but it's about asking better questions, like who feels safe in these spaces? Who gets centered and who gets pushed to the margins? Because one of the biggest shifts right now is that people are no longer ignoring those questions. There's more attention on intersectionality, not just as a concept, but as something lived. Black queer folks, trans folks, disabled folks, neurodivergent people who have often been sidelined, even within queer spaces, are shaping what community looks like now. And that means some spaces are being challenged or left behind entirely, which can be uncomfortable, but also necessary. And alongside that, identity itself feels more fluid than ever. Labels are still meaningful to many people, but they're also being stretched, remixed, or sometimes rejected altogether. You'll hear people say, I don't really have a label, or it depends on the day, or this is the closest word, but not exactly. And instead of that becoming like confusing, it's becoming normal. There's also less pressure to perform queerness in a way that's easy for others to understand. Less respectability, politics, less this is how you should look, act, or date. More room to experiment. You can see it in fashion too. There's this mix of softness and edge, vintage and futuristic, masc and femme and neither and both. It's less about fitting into a category and more about expressing something internal, something that might not even have a name. And I think that connects to another big shift: mental health. People are talking more openly about how hard this can be, not just being queer in a straight world, but navigating queer spaces that don't always feel safe or affirming. The loneliness, the burnout, the feeling of being visible but not necessarily seen. And because of that, people are setting boundaries, logging off, leaving spaces that don't feel good, choosing smaller circles over larger ones, focusing more on friendships, on chosen family, if you've used that before, on relationships that feel reciprocal. There's also more conversation around community care, not just take care of yourself, but how do we take care of each other? That can look like mutual aid, sharing money, resources, and support. I'm even seeing in my Instagram feed friends that are looking to barter more these days, sharing in those resources, sharing in their own personal gifts, what they might do for a living, what their side hustle is, and bartering for something like legal help or babysitting, things like that. So when we go back to these mutual aid and sharing money, resources, or support, it can also be as simple as checking in, showing up, being consistent. And then there's the media. Because yes, queer representation is bigger than it used to be. Amen. But people are also more critical of it. It's not enough to just be included anymore. People want authenticity, complexity, stories that go beyond coming out, beyond trauma, beyond stereotypes. I think I'm seeing so many more characters in so many different shows across different genres on different streaming platforms than I ever have in my life. Like seeing us, on the small screen, on the big screen, it really makes a difference. And a lot of that is happening outside of mainstream media. Independent creators, smaller platforms, people telling their own stories in their own way, which feels aligned with everything else we've been talking about. Less centralized, more personal, more intentional. One more thing before I let you go. Told you it's a solo cast today. It's going to be short and sweet. It's July now. The parades are over. The rainbow logos are already back to normal on every corporate account except mine. And there's this quiet assumption that comes with that, like Pride was a season and the season is now closed. But Stonewall wasn't a parade, it was a riot. And Pride was never supposed to clock out when the merch does. There's actually a whole month in the fall, October, that's recognized as LGBTQ History Month. National Coming Out Day falls on the 11th also. So different energy than June, less celebration, more remembering, more education. So if June is when we're loud, maybe the rest of the year is when we're steady, showing up for each other in the ordinary months. Not because a hashtag is trending, but because the community doesn't actually take a break. If anything, that's the whole point of everything I just talked about. The apps, the burnout, the smaller circles, the mutual aid. That's not seasonal. That's just life. Queer life in July, in November, in February, same as June. So no, it doesn't stop. It just gets quieter. And maybe quieter is where the real stuff happens anyways. So when you step back and look at all of this together, it's not just a bunch of random trends. It's a shift in values from fast to slow, from broad to specific, from visibility to connection. And maybe that's the question underneath all of it. Not just where do I belong, but where do I actually feel seen? And what am I telling and willing to leave behind? Let's see, what am I willing to leave behind to find that? Everything. Thanks for sitting with me on this. If any of this resonates with you, I'd love for you to reflect on it or even talk about it with someone you trust. I'll see you next time.
If you liked this episode, please hit the follow button and remember, sharing is caring. Until next week, stay proud, stay loud. If you liked this episode, please hit the follow button and remember, sharing is caring. Until next week, stay proud, stay loud.